All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our October Nonprofit Cafe. I hope you are staying warm and cozy wherever you are tuning in from this morning. My name is Jill Elwood. I am the Nonprofit Programming and Relations Manager at the One Valley Community Foundation, the host of Nonprofit Cafe. And our mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. One of the ways we do that is through nonprofit capacity building. So thank you for joining today and for taking the time to learn with us. Before we get started, we have a couple of kind of housekeeping announcements, although I'm sure many of you have heard me say this all a million times before. But for our Zoom today, if you could keep yourselves muted if you are not actively speaking, we would appreciate it. Additionally, if you wouldn't mind, if you have the capacity to turn your camera on, it's always more fun to talk to a room full of friendly faces than a big black screen. So we would love to see who's here this morning. We would also just love to know who is here this morning. So if you want to open your chat and share your name, your organization, and if you want to share a challenge going on with your board right now, you're welcome to. If you want it to be anonymous, we'll have some opportunities to share out later. But again, if you could just pop into the chat and share your name, your organization, and if you would like a challenge with your board right now, we would love to see who's here. Welcome, welcome. Multiple folks from the Verge Theater. Thanks for joining. Good morning, Kate and Marianne. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We're so excited to learn with you today. Good morning, Jenny. Lastly, if your Zoom name is not your actual name, if you share with a coworker or share with a spouse or a family member, if you could make sure that your name is reflective of who is actually in this room, that would be so helpful so that later on, if you're asking questions, we know who we're talking to. Feel free if you want to as well to include your organization and or your pronouns in that, but not mandatory. But yeah, thank you again for being here. All right. Let's see. We are going to go ahead and dive in today, and I am really just so genuinely excited to have Melanie, our speaker, with us today. Melanie and Chase from Bannack Group reached out to see if they could do a nonprofit cafe session, and I am so deeply grateful because I would say pretty much everyone who has been in the nonprofit world in the Gallatin County for a little while knows of Bannack Group and their amazing work. Melanie is a seasoned nonprofit attorney with extensive experience as a C-suite executive, in-house counsel, communications strategist, frontline fundraiser, and planned gift specialist. And working with her to plan this session was so fun because she's literally an expert in so many things across the nonprofit sector that when we were trying to come up with this month's topic, we bounced around ideas from fundraising to board development to strategy because she can literally do it all. So we are so grateful for her to volunteer her time and join us today to help support and uplift the nonprofit sector here in the Gallatin County. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie and we will dive in.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I would say happy winter, but that would be lying for me. Now begins the season of just being cold. I texted my family. I've got two kids in college, one that's in middle school here, and my husband is currently on a business trip in Denver. And yesterday morning, I texted them and said, it's been 30 hours with snow. I've been living in a coat. I've slid through 2 intersections, nearly been hit once, and everybody's forgotten to park. Remind me when spring is, please. But nevertheless, here we are. Thank you for sharing part of your Friday morning with me. I'm excited to talk, I guess, to you, but also hopefully with you by virtue of chat, as well as questions that you may have. Certainly, I have a lot of material to go through, but please don't think that this is a one-way street of information. There should be and can certainly be an opportunity to exchange during the session, as well as I'm hoping to cover everything so that we have time at the end for questions as well. For the record, at the end of this, you'll also have my contact information. So if questions come up afterwards or you didn't feel comfortable asking those questions during the session or putting them in the chat, you can certainly reach out to me either by phone or by email as well. Let's see, a couple of housekeeping things. I told Jill this earlier. I'm home alone with a dog and a cat that normally are fairly self-sufficient, but they may very well make an appearance today. If they do, they will. You'll meet them, that's all. All right, let's dive in. We are talking today about board onboarding and sort of my, I guess, philosophy about that and what that looks like from a consultant's chair, as well as from the chair of having been a C-suite executive in a nonprofit, then also actually as a board member as well for a handful of nonprofits here in the Valley. So today's conversation, I always kind of like to start off with this introduction of kind of the why me, why you, what the heck are we trying to do here, and why does it matter? As Jill said, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for amazingly 20 years. I don't know where that time has gone. And more shockingly, 17 years of that has been spent in the nonprofit space. My cutting my teeth in the nonprofit space was actually with the Montana State University Foundation, where I was the general counsel and chief executive officer. I was actually hired there to run their planned giving program, and then that job morphed over the years. And then I left that job to start Bannack Group. We're a national nonprofit consultancy with a big footprint here in Montana, because all of us are connected to Bozeman or Montana, and really believe in the work that we do because we believe in the work that you all do. And it is amazingly fun and inspiring and interesting to work with folks every day that are working on really important missions that benefit the literal and figurative backyard for me, for our team at Bannack as well. So the why you question is really, hopefully you're here because you're either running a nonprofit organization or working with a nonprofit organization, or maybe you're on the board and you want that board to be high performing or better performing. Or maybe you have a question or a concern about something that's happening on the board. Hopefully the session today will provide you with some insight and some good implementable tools that you can use to do those things at the end here. So what are we trying to do? Fundamentally, what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is provide you with what I would call a broader view of what onboarding really means for a board. Far too often when we, Bannack Group, are asked to help with boards, what we find out is where there is a disconnect, or there's a disconnect somewhere along the line, and kind of go back, like follow the trail, and you see that there wasn't really a good onboarding process, or maybe the onboarding process was an orientation, and that's it. And there's a lot more to onboarding, and it starts a lot earlier than even the the orientation process. So providing you with kind of that broader view of what onboarding looks like and what it can be like for your organization is really fundamentally what we're trying to do. So why does that matter? 1,000 different reasons, but there are 4 primary ones that I came up with, sort of boxes, as it relates to the key important reasons that onboarding matters. We want the right people on our board, right? And air quoting the word right people. That's unique for every organization. But even the right people need some sort of direction. I'm a parent. What I figured out in parenting is, as much as kids say they don't want rules, they absolutely want rules, right? They want kind of guideposts to know what are the expectations so they can kind of self-regulate and kind of move in a direction that is desired, or I'll use the term pleasing, to whomever it is that they're has those expectations. So creating kind of those boundaries, I guess, or maybe it's just the guidepost is a better term, like I used before, helps those right people move in that right direction. Otherwise, quite frankly, they don't know what you're expecting of them. The other one is that reputation matters. What we hear a lot about reputation is impact, right? We need to be talking about our mission. What is it that we're doing? How does that impact our community? How does it impact the people we're serving? But one of the pieces that we forget about is that the people involved in our organization, especially our board, is very much a key component of your organization's reputation. The flip side of that is when you have a good reputation, new board members are more likely to be interested in serving on your board. It's kind of the good board begets a good board. It's sort of this, well, I'll use this phrase later too, but birds of a feather flock together, right? So reputation matters. Also, fundamentally, an engaged board can do more, it can handle more, and it can deliver more. We have seen in this valley, in this country, a lot of organizations go through a lot of really deep crapola, right? IRS coming down on them, the newspaper reporting on them, donors fleeing from them. We're seeing it happen right now in the United States. When you have an engaged board, it's almost as though there's no hill that's tall enough for that board to feel like they can't get over that. And it's because those boards are not just connected to the mission, but they're connected to one another. And they have this kind of this joint rallying cry, so to speak. They can have tough discussions and make tough decisions and walk out of that boardroom still talking to each other. That doesn't happen in an organization where the board has some sort of disconnect or they're disengaged for some reason. And then the other component is, quite frankly, it just makes your life easier. And when you have a good onboarding process, it really simplifies everything over time. I use a lot of idioms, and one of the things that I use in this realm is it greases the skids, right? It just makes things flow smoother, flow faster along the way. And all of that is primarily because if you as an executive director or you as a staff member or even you as a board member are spending so much time gnashing your teeth and wringing your hands over junk that's happening inside of the board or trying to get the board more engaged, you do not have time to deliver on the mission or work on projects or whatever it might be. So as soon as you get that board really firing in all cylinders, now you're actually going to be in that spot where you have I'll say an easier time, knowing that the term easy really should be italicized when I say that, because it's still challenging to do the work that we're all doing, right? But it does kind of take some of the barriers out. Jill, now is the time to actually deploy that poll, because one of the things I want to learn about a little bit is kind of what the scope and scale is of the organizations that you're working with.
Do you want to do both questions or just the one about?
You can go ahead and do both questions. That's fine.
All right, we will launch them both.
All right, as that's, you can continue to go through the poll, and when I have the responses, I'll have the responses. It'll provide me some context as I move into these next set of slides. So it's important to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about too. And one of the things that I hear a lot is this question of, with so many nonprofits, especially here in Bozeman, how do we make sure we stand out? You know, how do we make sure that donors hear us, donors see us, that we have the opportunity to get in front of folks? What's interesting about that question, I think, is that there's a lot of, I would call, implied assumptions associated with it. And by and large, what people automatically assume is that the way that they need to stand out is fully and solely on that impact component, the mission component. Hang on one second. I have to move a couple of screens around. I've got a pop-up screen happening. Sorry. There we go.
I also am sharing out the results of that poll, Melanie.
Perfect. Thank you. Got them. Thanks. So the when we're talking about standing out as an organization, there's 1,000 different ways to do that. What you want to be standing out for, though, is, of course, the right reasons, right? And one of those right reasons is, quite frankly, with your board, the quality of your board and how it actually works together. But one of the contextual pieces of that question is that phrase, with so many nonprofits. And so we're going to, once and for all, bust some myths about Bozeman's nonprofit space and give you also a red flag. So in the United States, there are 1.5 million 501c3 organizations. That is, in scientific terms, a crap ton of nonprofits, right? So these are just 501c3s, not 501c4s, not other C6s, et cetera. It's just C3 organizations. But in Montana, there are 15,237 as of the last census that was taken. That is, again, C3 organizations. In Bozeman, registered nonprofits in Bozeman, there's 1,032. That is a lot, right? That is a lot of nonprofits. But we have heard over time, many years, that Bozeman has the highest per capita number of nonprofits in the United States. False. That is not true. It's actually Boston that has the highest number of nonprofits per capita, but Montana as a state does have the highest number of nonprofits per capita. I mean, it helps that we only have like 1 million people in the state, but nevertheless, we are still in a fairly competitive market. There's no doubt about it. But when we actually drill down on that, some of the things that we need to recognize is that of that 15,237 nonprofits, 70% of them have budgets of less than $250,000 a year. That is a very large percentage of organizations that are fairly small. That doesn't mean they're not important. It just means that they're very small. So when we talk about this competitive environment for fundraising, which is usually what we hear, we're really mostly talking about, call it, 350 or so nonprofit organizations in Bozeman proper that are really competing on that broader level. Does that make it better? Does that give you like the ability to sleep at night about how you're going to meet budget? Probably not. But it is providing attempt to provide some context as it relates to sort of that competition. So as I said before, the vast majority have annual budgets of under $250,000, which means only about 30% or so are actually really heavily in that fundraising space. But where the competition is for board members. Every single one of those 1,032 nonprofits in Bozeman, let alone the 15,000, let alone the 1.5 million, need board members. And if you're in Montana, how many do you need? Show me fingers. Show me fingers. Come on, folks. How many do you need? You need 3 at a minimum to be legally sufficient in the state of Montana. It's okay if you didn't know. Now you know. And interestingly enough, that's the number that was coming up on the polls as far as numbers of average numbers of board members. When I say that every single one of them needs, the reality is every single one of them is competing for those board members, which means this is where, from my opinion, you do need to set yourself apart. Yes, on fundraising, but people are going to love your mission and they're going to give. But when it comes to serving, giving of your time, you have got to set yourself apart. Because if we run the numbers and we just take the minimum number of board members, we need 3,096 adults to be willing to serve on a board in Bozeman. If we take a national average, which a national average is 8 members for a board, that's 8,256 people are needed to serve on boards of those 1,032 nonprofits. So we're somewhere in that range, right? From 3,000 to call it 8,000 for easy math. The challenge becomes that Bozeman as a town, according to the 2022 census, has 53,293 people in it. What that means is that we have a ratio of 2 people for every board seat, or 6 people for every board seat. That is a fairly narrow window. And where I come to that number is not on the raw data of 53,000 people. It's that only 83% of those 50,000 people are not kids. And then I kind of halved it to say, well, we also want people that are board material, which aren't necessarily going to be everyone. So I just have the number of adults, and that's where I came up with this ratio. So in the end, basically what we're talking about is somewhere between a ratio of 1 board seat for every 2 people or 1 board seat for every 6 people, assuming a Bozeman nonprofit and assuming a Bozeman-based board. Obviously, those numbers change if we're getting outside of the city or getting outside of the county or certainly outside of the state. But nevertheless, the point is it is a competitive marketplace for boards. So The place that we start is we have to recognize that our board of directors are truly VIPs, but they are VIPs in three different ways. They are very important people who are serving a very important purpose. That means you owe them a very important process, an onboarding process that is intended to start early and see them all the way through their board service. Some onboarding myths that I hear all the time. It's a one and done, meaning we do orientation, we're done. It only matters to new directors. So we're only onboarding new directors. It's a one-way street of information delivery. So I'm the executive director and I'm providing the information and that's it. A board book is sufficient. I've served on that board, where you hand the individuals a bunch of paper and you're like, best of luck. We'll see you at the next meeting. Hear that one a lot. I also hear this term or this phraseology or something to this effect of, it's worthless, it's boring, it's totally forgettable. Sometimes that's actually coming from the new board member who's sitting through the orientation. The totally forgettable piece oftentimes is the case. No one wants to do it. Organizations don't want to do it. Board members don't want to do it. Certainly existing board members, they've done it, been there, done that, don't want to do it. There's also, for some reason, this view that there's only one right way to do it. Also, that it starts and, quite frankly, ends with orientation. And then the last one is that it doesn't really matter over the long term. And maybe the totally forgettable and that one go a little bit hand in glove. And the sticky wicket about these myths is that it honestly can be that all of them are true for an organization. But hopefully your goal is to make all of them be false for your organization. I have seen and I have lived on both sides of this from the standpoint of being an executive for I already said the organization, as well as being a board member and being in a situation where these are true, where we just are kind of running through the checklist as opposed to really engaging board members and new board members in ways that are going to set them on the right feet for the long term. So our goal is to actually basically apply this max engagement equation. 4 things equaling happy engaged board members. Number 1 is strategic recruitment. Number 2 is multi-phase orientation. Did I say number 3? Did I do this and do number 3? Oh my gosh, I need more coffee. So number 2 is multi-phase orientation. Number 3 is intentional incorporation. And number 4 is ongoing engagement. Every single one of those is intended to be active. It's not intended to be just this static noun or this, call it, pronoun of a program, so to speak. They are meant to be active, and we're going to walk through each of those 4. When you add up those 4 together, that is when you are going to have happy and engaged board members that develop into this effective, engaged board, which we said at the beginning are able to do more, handle more, and just have bigger and broader impact for your organization. So let's start with strategic recruitment. Within the world of strategic recruitment, we are hoping to identify, I love the word woo because it's important. We are identifying, wooing, and landing the right people for your organization. And again, the word right is in quotes because what is right for one organization is not right for another organization. And that's up to your board to define. So when it comes to strategic recruitment, how do I say this right? The recruitment process happens before you ever pick up the phone to talk to a prospective board member. The recruitment process happens first with your current board. Your current board has to define the culture and values of that board. This doesn't mean what your board looks like. It more is about what your board feels like. And I'll come back to that here in a little bit. The board also needs to be assessing their strengths so they understand what's missing or what they have too much of. And then we also need to be in the recruiting for culture, values, and then working on skills and connectivity. We're going to go through each of these here in a little bit. And then we also have to be really honest when we come to the conversation with prospective board members about what it is that we're asking them to do. I have been recruited for a board where I was asking questions and realizing that what I was being told was actually not the same as what was written down as far as the expectations. That led to an interesting conversation. And I've seen that actually in practice as well on the consulting side. So we're going to go through each of these, starting with basically involving the board. So one of the things that I said before about one of the myths is that onboarding only applies to new or prospective board members. This is where that myth gets busted, because onboarding also needs to involve your current and existing board. You are in the process of continuously engaging, and I'll use the term wooing again, not only new board members, but also existing board members to be engaged, stay engaged, and then help you to find other people who are willing to be engaged as well. So let's talk a little bit about what defining board culture means. Before you ever get into that recruiting process and identifying like who should be on the board, let alone inviting people to be on the board, if you're having issues with your board, you need to first and foremost define the board culture. And as I said before, this isn't what your board looks like. It's truly about how it feels to be a member of your board. How does the board interact with each other? How do they communicate with each other? Is it a trusting board? Meaning, can they have hard conversations, as I said before, and then make decisions and still walk out of that boardroom and talk to one another? Can they, do they enjoy being with one another? Do they understand the mission? That is all part and parcel of board culture or board values. So the question then becomes basically, how do you define it? Well, it is not something that any executive director is going to define. It's not going to be one board member that defines it. It is the board member as a whole. And I strongly recommend that if this is not something that you've already done as for your board, you give them the opportunity to do this either through a retreat or a special board meeting where this is the focus of that interaction. And it is basically a conversation about how the board wants to go about doing its work, how it wants to treat each other. What is the preferred atmosphere of the boardroom? That is the conversation. It's not about necessarily how we're doing that right away. It's about what we want for this board. Then you have the opportunity to basically say, now, if this is what we want, where are we now, and what goals do we want to put in place to get there? The what we're striving for becomes your statement of values for your board. If you do not have a statement of values that's drafted for your board, also encourage you to get that taken care of, because that statement of values is kind of the bellwether for how your board is interacting with each other. And it's also the document that from which comes the board member code of conduct. The statement of values is kind of more like, call it your mission statement. This is what we're striving to do. But the code of conduct becomes more of the like operational plan. This is how we're going to go about doing it. The code of conduct is something that's going to guide individual board members' activity, but the statement of values is, like I said, what defines that atmosphere. Once you have that in place, then it's important to go forward and actually, oops, sorry, my screen is not moving forward. There we go. You need to lean into then assessing what the board strengths and skills are. How many have heard of the term board matrix? Should be out there, right? Good. I see some hands going up. That's great. So the board matrix is an incredible tool. It's like the Rosetta Stone of recruitment. A lot of organizations don't do this, which I find silly because it's quite frankly a really easy tool. There's 1,006 of them that are out there on the web, so you can easily download one. Don't just, I call them Mad Libs documents, where you like fill in a blank here, fill in a blank there, and then you get this crazy story. Don't do that. But there are so many examples out there that you can beg, borrow, and steal from to create your own. But the board strengths and skills assessment, that board matrix is, like I said, it's very much that inventory of skills, expertise, and demographics that are represented by the current board. It also needs to include, and I'll go through some of the things that need to be on that board matrix on the next slide, but it also needs to include some of the inclinations, meaning what are your board members willing to do? That's one of the pieces that is often left off of board matrices. I don't know if that's the right plural. But nevertheless, it's important to include that in there. And what will make a board matrix very powerful is if you overlay the terms on top of that. So you can see when these various skills, strengths, and expertise are actually terming off. So you can start planning more for when do we need somebody who has strategic planning skills or whatever it might be. How and when do you use this? Well, if you don't have it, get it done. If you do have it, just make sure you're updating it at least annually. And then every single time there's an actual director transition, either somebody turns off the board or somebody comes onto the board, it needs to be redone. I like to do it as just part of kind of like the conflicts of interest process when you're having people sign annual disclosures. By the way, you should have people sign annual disclosures of conflicts of interest, but have those two things coupled. It is exceptionally important for the board members themselves to fill out their own assessments. I was in a really awkward board meeting one time where we were handed the board matrix and they had gone ahead and said where each board member had skills, expertise, and fit on demographics. And the poor woman sitting next to me was aged up a decade. She was none too pleased. So it is important for them to do the self-assessment on their own or self-identification as it relates to the matrix as well. And then what's the whole point of it? Well, I already said that the whole point of the board matrix is to use it to prioritize basically what you need for a well-rounded board. And what we're really looking at is those skills and inclination component, as well as, quite frankly, the diversity component. Diversity I use as a little d, and what I mean by that is diversity is defined by your own organization and also the place in which you live. Diversity in Bozeman is not necessarily as visible as it would be in other areas, but that doesn't mean there isn't opportunity for diversity. And diversity also should, the level of diversity should be reflective of your mission, of who you're trying to serve. So anyway, the board matrix is really intended to help you identify where are the holes, where are the missing skills and expertise, and also where are you heavy. You might be super heavy in strategic planning. I've never seen a board matrix that's super heavy in fundraising, unfortunately. That would be nice. But nevertheless, it kind of helps you to see where you might have needs for your board as you move forward. This particular slide just basically shows you kind of the basis or the basics as it relates to what should be on a board matrix. Honestly, when you're thinking in Excel spreadsheet format, you have the potential of having like 64 different columns of different information. And while that seems unwieldy, the reality is it's just check boxes. And so really the unwieldiness of the board matrix is in the creation of it, not in the maintenance of it. So once it's created, it's very easy to keep up to date. The areas of expertise need to be in there. Obviously, there's some that are highlighted there, as well as some skills and experience. I just put 2 in. There's tons more that you can put in there, but strategic planning and fundraising are 2 that are super important to have in there. Maybe crisis communications would be a third one, which would be interesting to know if somebody has experience with that. The attributes and inclinations section is one that I often see overlooked. Are people willing to give money? Are people willing to ask for money? Are people willing to connect you to their networks? And are they willing to volunteer for your organization? Those 4 are the basics. There are plenty of others that you might want to include, but from my vantage point, those 4 are necessary to find out whether or not you are heavy or light in any particular area. Obviously, age groups, just do them by decades. Diversity, I like putting committee service on there as well, because with the term length and the committee service, That helps you kind of have a one-stop document to be able to see what the ebb and flow is of your board. Again, so that you understand, oh, look, we're going to be losing 2 people off our finance committee. Okay, well, that kind of gives us an idea of who we might be needing or who we need to be looking for in our current board to fill into those positions. And then the one piece that I think often gets overlooked is this question of whether or not that individual has interest in a leadership position on the board. It's just a yes, no, or maybe. There are plenty of boards that have a lot of worker bees, and that's fantastic. But then when it comes to succession planning, they sit there blinking at one another. You want to know ahead of time, is somebody interested in moving up that sort of officer chain, so to speak? Because if they're not, well, then you need to be looking for people that are, or sweetening the pot, I guess, trying to get somebody to say yes to that chairmanship. Okay, when it comes to selection, it's also critically important that we do this in an objective manner. I've used the phrase already, birds of a feather flock together. That's fantastic when you have a good board. It is absolutely not fantastic when you have a board that's having challenges, especially challenges as far as like personality conflicts or untrustworthiness or lack of confidentiality or whatever it might be. When you have an objective selection process for your prospective board members, it helps to take a lot of that off of the table of discussion. We have to, though, start with affinity. There are far too many organizations that look at their board matrix and say, we need a lawyer. Okay. I mean, fabulous. Glad you need a lawyer, but don't you want a lawyer who loves your mission and whose values fit within that culture of the board? I hope the answer to that is yes. And it's a lot easier to tune into somebody's skills and experience and get them working for you if you're also not trying to convince them to love your organization. So start with that mission and values fit, and then use the quantitative data to prioritize candidates. I have these slides flipped over, so I'm going to go to this one first. So when we talked about a board matrix, this is another type of matrix, but this is your selection matrix. Very simple document. You can use this. You'll get these slides, by the way, but you can use this. You can change it. You can make your own. But basically what it is, it's an intention to, an intent to kind of have an inventory of prospective board members. It's very simple. The name, it's important from my vantage point to have a city and state, because if you have something other than just local impact, you want to be reflective of that more regional approach or statewide or national approach. And then in the smaller categories, you're actually going to be scoring people on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. Do they support the mission? If they've been a donor, if they've been at things, if they've said, I love your organization, they're probably going to be a 5, right? Are they a values match? That basically means, like, can you see them fitting into the board culture the way it is? Maybe there's somebody who you just don't know a whole lot about. So maybe that's a 1, or maybe it's a 5 because they already know a lot of people and you can tell that they're going to be a great match. They've got the skills and experience, et cetera, et cetera. And then you just tally that up and you come to this total, and it gives you a very easy way to, on a quantitative, from a quantitative way, to basically start prioritizing who makes the most amount of sense to start recruiting first. Then there's also this question of, is there a flyer, right? Is there one sort of the outlier type of characteristic that's important? That very well may be the case. If you've got somebody who has a lower score, but what they have is, they uniquely fill the various categories that are empty in your board matrix, well, maybe they rise to a higher level. But that's still quantitative data, because you're looking at your board matrix and you're looking at your recruitment matrix and saying, where is the best fit? Where is the best overlap? And like I said before, that's how you begin prioritizing those conversations. Questions on that? Okay, I have to adjust one thing. Suddenly it's sunny, which is nice. At least it is by my house, and I've got sun pouring into this window. So just a second. Um, One of the things that I really like about this particular uh, one of the things that I like about this particular matrix is that it kind of kills the popularity contest conversation that we often hear, meaning like, oh, I like them, so they'd be great, or well, that person knows a lot of people, so they'd be the best person for the board. Maybe not, maybe not. Um, a question just came in as it relates to recruiting people that will fit within the culture of our boards. And what if the existing culture conflicts with the goal of diversifying perspectives and leadership? It's a great question, Kate. It goes back to really setting that culture component of having the real gut conversation with your existing board, or maybe a subset of your existing board. It could be the executive committee, to really talk about, what is it that the board needs to be doing differently, and what are we striving for this organization and for the board itself. um, your statement of values should not just be realistic, it should also be somewhat aspirational, meaning that you have to work every single day as a board to be adhering to that, or meeting that. And so it starts with redefining the culture of the board fundamentally. And maybe, for lack of a better way to say it, restricting who is nominating board members. And so rather than having nominations from the board as a whole, create a nominating committee of people that are reflective of what you're hoping to achieve with the board from a culture standpoint, and look for nominations from that group, or have nominations go through them. If we don't do that, and we're trying to kind of, turn the ship, so to speak, it can be really hard, because people are hanging on to what is the helm? Is that what that's called on a ship? The big, like, pirate ship? I think it's a helm. Some people are holding on to it on the left side, where the rest of the board is trying to get it to go right. We want fewer people holding on to that left, which means we got to get them out of the I don't know, the room that they steer in. Obviously, I'm not a mariner. Okay. When it comes to the actual recruitment process, it's exceptionally important to be honest. I said before, I've been in situations where honesty wasn't necessarily, or what I was being told wasn't necessarily reflective of the documents that were shared, which definitely raised red flags. I did not join that board. Nevertheless, honest outreach and being really candid with information when you're talking with somebody about potentially being on the board is really important. I am a firm believer that you have to meet with candidates in person. Obviously, there are different situations where Zoom works fine, but don't just do it on the phone. Have actually eyeballs to eyeballs, so to speak, with the individual that you're recruiting. And I like to see it at two levels. Number one, I like to see a board member or two board members be meeting with the prospective recruit, and also the executive director. A board that I'm serving on now, I met with the executive director, and it was incredibly valuable because I got to hear the executive director's vision for the organization, what the goals are, how she operates, what she likes to see in the board, what she likes from an organizational interaction standpoint. Exceptionally important for somebody who's essentially going to be one of her bosses, right? Like I want to know who that person is and what their vision is for the organization. When it's board members who are recruiting, then it's really more about that mission, what the role of the board is, and again, what that aspiring board culture and values are for the organization. Do not be afraid to actually share information with that individual, like printed out information or emailed information. Too often I see it's just kind of a conversation, as opposed to actually providing tangible documents that they can look at. Good board members are going to want, people who are going to become good board members are going to want to see the annual report. If you have a strategic plan, they're going to want at least a high level idea of where this organization is going. What am I signing up for? I want to know if I'm going to step into a multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign. That's something I need to know before saying yes. I also want a board list. I want to see the contact information. I want to have the carte blanche to be able to pick up the phone and call the board chair or call somebody and ask them and kind of do an interview. Because in the end, this is a job, it's a volunteer job, but you want to be able to have the opportunity to check in. So providing that job description is also important. If you don't have one, get one. They can be very simple. They do not need to be multi-page. They're obviously not an employment contract. It's just basically listing out sort of what the roles and responsibilities and the expectations are for that individual position, meaning a board member. I also like to preview the board commitment form. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, and also be really honest from a time commitment standpoint. How long are the terms? How often do you meet? Are there event obligations you need to be going to? Oh, on the meetings, how long are the meetings? That's also a good thing to let people know. By the way, if your board meetings are going over 2 hours, you need to have a conversation about what's going on in your board meeting, or most importantly, what's not happening between board meetings, because they shouldn't be that long. And then any giving or fundraising expectations. That is someplace you do not want anybody to be surprised by. I'm a firm believer that every single board should be a giving and getting board. That means every single board member is a giving and getting board member. I get pushback on that a lot. I will never change my opinion. Giving does not need to be big. It needs to be personally meaningful. And unless there's an actual board adopted minimum, like a pay to play type of minimum, which pay to play sounds so skeezy and it's not intended to be, it's just the term for it. Have at it. If you want to do that and that's your board culture, fine. But giving as a board member is incredibly important. There are some asterisks there as it relates to some social services organizations that have by charter or federal mandate a requirement to have individuals whom they serve on the board, then value their time. Because we can, by nonprofits, put an amount, a dollar amount to the time that's volunteered. And in those particular situations, then we value their time. Obviously, we colloquially value everybody's time, but actually putting a dollar amount, and that is their gift to the organization, is totally fine. The last thing that I'll say about recruitment is please don't ever lean into a conversation and say, well, we needed a lawyer. That is, when I talked about that organization that was recruiting me and didn't have the right information, that is literally what it started with. Well, we needed a lawyer. And I'm like, well, my last name either starts with a B or an S, depending on which one you choose. And so there's a lot of other names you had to go through before you got to me. Why me? It can't be just because I'm a lawyer. That's the worst way to recruit somebody, is to tell them I'm recruiting you because of your job. Instead, it needs to be about the unique values and the unique skills and experience that they're going to be bringing to the board and what you're hoping that they can deliver. Okay, moving on, because I got to talk faster or move faster. When it comes to orientation, this is the spot where most people start their onboarding process. It is the second step of onboarding. It is not the first or last step. When it comes to orientation, what we're trying to do is obviously set people on the right path from the start. I'm a firm believer that there is that no one size fits all for orientation, but there is a standard. And that standard should be a written down, defined process. It's not an ad hoc series of conversations that you go through willy-nilly. It needs to be defined. Does that mean you have a checklist? Yes. Does that mean it feels like you're going through a checklist? No, because in the end, what it needs to be is it needs to be an information exchange, a two-way street. It also needs to be timely. Do not elect somebody and then 6 months later, because now you have enough people, orient them. You have lost 6 months of time with that brand new board member. Orient them upon election or right before they're basically stepping into that actual service. Some organizations have a delay between election and onboarding, so to speak, but I'm a firm believer of immediately upon election. Excuse me. The other thing is making it both multi-session and multi-style. Self-study is important, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but having multiple sessions also helps people to really let the information sink in. Otherwise, it's just blah, so much information thrown at them, and then they turn around and have to go to a board meeting. And what's going on? So it leaves head spinning too much. So it's important to have that multi-style, and then also, or multi-session, and then also making it be inclusive, that existing directors come to. That doesn't mean all of them, but it's open to them. More importantly, those existing members actually have a role in the orientation process itself. So the two phases of orientation that I like are the self-study and the in-person. The reason that self-study is important is it's sort of like going to a presentation and having a PowerPoint and have somebody read a PowerPoint presentation to you. That's not helpful. You know, we are recruiting adults, presumably adults who can read, and presumably adults who should be motivated to at least get their feet underneath them as it relates to moving into the organization. So having this self-study sort of set of documents, whether that be actually physical documents or having some password protected area on a website, is a great way to begin engaging people right away. Having that mission, having that statement of values, I think it's important to give them a peek into the prior year's 990. It's a public record anyway. If you've got audited financial statements, put those in there. And then some of those key documents. It is unlikely that 75% of brand new board members are going to read through your articles of incorporation and your bylaws and all of those policies. But I guarantee you that the 25% who will want that information. I'm one of those individuals. And it helps to, again, even just give the individual the sense that, oh, this is an organization that has their ducks in a row because they've got all of this. The bios and pictures, please, of current board members and key staff is really important as well. Bios don't need to be, pages long. It can just be a little short thing that includes why did they get on the board, update those obviously on an annual basis, and then a board calendar. So allowing that individual to basically work through that information before you have an in-person orientation. Orientation in person should never be more than 90 minutes. Nobody thinks beyond that. Like we're done at that point in time. There's too much information. My daughter used to use the phrase or the term info muchmation, and I just loved it. It was such a good mashup of words. At the 90-minute mark, we hit info muchmation. We don't think anymore. We can't bring any more into our brains. I also think that there needs to be an impact tour, and the impact tour can be a video, but it also can be a physical tour, meaning you're coming to the location. So your HRDC, you go to the warming center, you see some of the sites. You are Headwaters Academy, you're actually looking at or going into the school and seeing kids working. That impact tour is exceptionally important because it immediately grounds those new board members into what it is that your organization is doing. And really importantly, it immediately gives them a story to tell, and they can immediately become those mission evangelists for your organization. I'm a believer also that in-person orientation should include all new directors, not just one-on-one. It should also have the board chair and the executive director in there. There might be some topics where the executive director isn't there, fine. But board chair and executive need to be there because that's a team. That's a team, and that team needs to be responsible for bringing those new board members into that culture. And then, like I said, any other board members who want to attend, but they're not just sitting there going like this, they actually need to be active as well. There are 4 primary questions that you want to answer in orientation. What is it that your organization does? So what do you do? Why is it important? So what's going to happen if you go away as an organization? What does success look like? What are you striving to achieve? How is the work funded is also critical. There are a lot of organizations that are responsible for raising 60, 70, 80, 90% of their operating budget. The board has a hand in that because every time a board approves a budget that has a fundraising goal in it, those boards better be ready to step up and help with that by giving and getting. And then how does the board directly help in the pursuit of all of that? Oftentimes individuals have a misunderstanding of what board service looks like. They think that it means that they're supposed to be doing the work, and and that can be really helpful. It can be great, but we also need board members to understand they have a higher role, or a different role, maybe is the better way to say it, of governance, that there's this oversight role, and that when they are kind of in the trenches on that volunteer, they're a volunteer, not a board member. But having that conversation is important. I'll let you read the other ones as it relates to aligning expectations and the board book. The one thing that I will say is I love this particular document. This document to me has been the best little cheat sheet as it relates to kind of helping new board members and existing board members orient on the what should we be doing, what should we absolutely not be doing, and what might we be doing. This is a really good way to just like I said, kind of have this cheat sheet. It's kind of the Cliff's Notes, so to speak. I don't know what the most current term or most current thing of Cliff's Notes is, but it's kind of the Cliff's Notes of board service. So feel free to steal this when you have the slides. Oh, by the way, that should be part of the orientation and in the board book itself. This is just a list of the things that absolutely have to be in the board book or available, like I said, online. The biggest things about a board book is this notion of don't judge a book by its cover. I actually literally had somebody accidentally spell board book B-O-R-E-D as opposed to B-O-A-R-D, which was a hilarious mistake, slightly Freudian, I'm sure. But what we don't want is the board book to be the proverbial strategic plan where we've, bound it, done this beautiful thing, and then we put it on a shelf. We want it to be an actual strategic plan where we're actually living and breathing in this particular document or this set of materials. So I believe that board books not only have a static section, like these are the things that are static, but then it also should be sort of ends up being a chronicle of the work of that particular board and the tenure of that particular board member as well. So you're continuously updating it, you're continuously adding to it. Okay, third step, woohoo, incorporating. This is where a lot of organizations fall on their face. They forget about the fact that once somebody is oriented, it doesn't mean that they automatically are connected into the organization. So we have to integrate and assimilate new board members without minimizing and neutralizing what it is that they were, what their skills and experience are intended to bring to the organization. I liken this to this very sort of strange, odd image of all these different ingredients. And the idea basically here is if we recruit somebody and we orient somebody and forget to incorporate them, it's basically like pulling all these ingredients out and saying, voila, it's cake. And it is absolutely not cake, right? It is just the ingredients. You have got to pick up that whisk and start mixing it and integrating the various ingredients in order to create this board situation that you're striving for. So as I said before, most onboarding programs start and end with orientation. Boo, wrong. There are so many other steps involved, which we're going to go through here. There's 3 primary ones that I want you to take into consideration. And committee service, get those board members immediately involved in committees, but please don't assign them. That's so offensive, I think, for organization to say, and you're going to be a member of this, because who knows whether or not they want to be a member of that. Who knows whether or not they're interested in that particular thing. We'll talk about the integration of how to go about committee assignment or committee selection here in a little bit. And then there's the ongoing training option as well. We're going to focus on the other steps and the committee service as we go through here. So when we're talking about integration or incorporating, it starts with the first meeting, and it actually starts before that. I just went onto the Bozeman Schools Foundation board, and I didn't see the whole attendee list. If they're here, wahoo, because this was by far the best pre-meeting meet and greet that I've ever been to as a new board member. Having snacks and drinks, I'm not talking necessarily about wine. It can be juice boxes. I don't care. But having snacks and drinks beforehand to meet the board just as a social, 45 minutes. That's all it needs to be. Maybe even 30 minutes. But have an assigned greeter so that when that new person walks in the room, that assigned greeter immediately goes up to them and says, welcome. It's great to have you here. Because who wants to walk into a party where you don't know anybody, right? That's what it's like to be a brand new board member. And make sure every single person has name tags. So having that pre-meeting meet and greet is super important to kind of have a soft landing spot for those new board members. And then the meeting agenda that follows starts with an icebreaker. And we can all roll our eyes about icebreakers because we've all been through, painful ones. I'm not talking about trust falls. I'm not talking about, tell us your deepest, darkest secrets, not even two truths and a lie. No, we'll leave that to junior high. What I'm talking about is an icebreaker that gets people the opportunity to, quite frankly, meet other people. I'm using the Bozeman Schools Foundation board again. When I went to the very first meeting, the icebreaker that they did was they handed us, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 or whatever questions, and it was like speed dating. So half of the board stood in one line and half of the board stood facing the other half, and we just went down the line, and you had the opportunity in a 2-minute process to ask somebody this question, but you started with like, hi, my name is, and every single person had a board member, including me, or excuse me, had a name tag, including me, who is a brand new board member. In 15 minutes of time, I had met every single board member. It was a phenomenal icebreaker. I can't tell you whether or not Christy Johns believes in ghosts. That was one of the questions, but I can tell you that I know Christy Johns. And I mean, having that type of icebreaker and just this sort of fun, get to know you sort of way is a great way just to immediately begin incorporating those board members to the organization itself. Don't forget about place names. They seem a little ridiculous and maybe a little like 4th and 5th grade, heads up, 7-up type of games. But having a place card for every board member at every single meeting is critical, because not all of us remember everybody. Some of us are really bad with names. But if you're also brand new to an organization, you don't have any idea who that person is, and you probably can't read their name tag from wherever you're sitting. So having place names is important. I also think it's important to monitor that meeting pace. So in your very first meeting, or when we have brand new board members, the board chair needs to understand that that's new for that person. So if they're ripping through like a consent agenda, and somebody who's brand new to the organization has no idea what a consent agenda is, or maybe hasn't ever done one, maybe they know it, but they've never done one, they don't know what's happening, right? So kind of having that monitoring of meeting pace and a little bit of like follow the bouncing ball type of work in that meeting is going to be helpful to that brand new board member. And then the 2 things that I think need to happen in the first meeting, well, I think a mission and impact report should happen in every single board meeting. Quite frankly, it doesn't need to look the same, but having that conversation about what it is that your organization is doing and what it looks like in action. The what it looks like in action is the piece that often is a disconnect with boards, is really important, because again, what you want is that individual to walk out of that board meeting and be your mission evangelist. They don't have those stories if you don't give them to them. The other thing that I think is important is board training. In the very first meeting, do a roles and responsibility, do a fiduciary duties overview. I'm talking about the meeting where basically you're having kind of this annual type of scenario. It is absolutely important to have kind of a refresh of fiduciary duties every single year with a board. It seems rote, it seems boring, but I tell you what's not boring: getting sued. So doing the fiduciary duties on an annual basis is a good idea, and having it correspond to when you have brand new members joining is really great, because then, like I said before, they're just immediately immersed in what it is that they're supposed to be doing. They're focused in and not sitting there wondering like, well, do I have vote yet? Or can I use my lawyer skills to help to make this decision? There's a lot of board members who actually think that like you check your brain at the board door, check your skills and experience at the board door, and now you're just there as a person. And while yes, you need to be there as a person, you also bring your skills and experience with. Okay. The mentoring piece and modeling piece also shouldn't be overlooked. When I talked about not assigning people to committees and letting them have say, that usually comes about by creating an open door policy for committees. Obviously, there's times where certain committees, as well as the board, need to have some sort of executive session. Fine. But within committees itself, board members should be welcome to go to those, and they should have access to the minutes. Just because I'm not a finance person doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what's happening in the finance committee. I want to know, and I dang well better know if I'm fulfilling my fiduciary duties as well. So having that open door policy for committees helps board members, new board members, kind of toe dip and kind of experience, okay, what, when you said governance, I didn't know that that also meant we needed to be nominating people. Or, you know, when you said, I'm trying to think of an example now. When you said the finance committee, I didn't know that we were also going to be responsible for investments. Well, if you didn't know that, you probably shouldn't be on the finance committee, but neither here nor there. It gives people, like I said, the opportunity to kind of toe dip. And more importantly, it gives them this 360 view of what the organization is up to in between those meetings. Otherwise, they just have this kind of myopic view of, well, I'm on the governance committee, so this is what happens, as opposed to also knowing that other committees are going about their work as well. Implementing a board member mentor program is also super important. This does not need to be like, you know, you're a mini version of a CAP program. That's not what I'm saying. And God bless CAP, right? Oh my God, they do amazing. Thrive does amazing work through that. But you know, when we're talking about a board mentor program, it can be a fairly informal thing, aside from the fact that every single board member who you want to be a mentor should be involved. Not every single board member, you know, going back to Kate's question, maybe not every single board member is the one you want like modeling behavior or modeling attitude or ideas for the organization. And so being fairly strategic about who's involved in the mentor program is something you can consider if you don't have sort of carte blanches or comfort that everybody on the board is going to be a good role model. I think there's two roles, meaning there's a primary mentor and there's a guide. And that guide kind of goes back to that initial like meet and greet. Like they're just the person that's the friendly face, that the like, hey, can't wait to see you at the board meeting, or you know, I'm going to this event, you want to come. Whereas the mentor itself is really more along the lines of like, we're going to do initially some bi-monthly check-ins. Bi-monthly, I don't mean twice a month. So I don't, every other month is what I meant when I wrote bi-monthly. You know, just having sort of that check-in of how's it going? How are you feeling? You have questions? You know, I know it's a lot. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, those types of things. I like when the mentor and the board member match up as far as committee membership as well, because then you have just another opportunity to have kind of that friendly face and the, well, the mentor as it relates to the work that you're doing there. I said before that I think having mission impact reports, you know, at every board meeting is important. That doesn't mean they need to be formal, but having impact stories, having an opportunity for board members to share impact is incredibly important. It continuously helps to ground the board in what the importance of their work. Oftentimes when we're talking about governance, when we're talking about budgets and finance and all of this sort of 30,000 foot level stuff, we forget that, oh my gosh, we're creating scholarships for kids. Or, you know, oh my gosh, we are ensuring that we're ensuring Yellowstone forever, right? Like those types of things we sometimes forget about because we're sort of stuck in this ethereal type of level. So having those mission moments to really ground folks is really important as well. Okay, here we go. Last section is the engagement piece. So we've gone through the strategic recruitment. We've gone through the orientation process. We've gone through the onboarding process, or excuse me, the incorporating process, and now we're in engaging. Once again, do not forget that it still requires you to get a board member to be engaged or provide them with the opportunities to be engaged. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, right? In the end, they're the ones who have to start drinking, but at least you can say that you provided them with every opportunity to be engaged. Early engagement in a board and in the board's work and in the organization's work is going to lead to a long-term commitment. And that doesn't necessarily just mean that they're going to fulfill their board service. It's going to mean that they're going to continue to be an advocate for your organization. They're going to continue to give They're going to continue to volunteer. They're just going to be a good advocate for you out there in the community. So how do we get them engaged? We at Bannack subscribe to the 3D approach to board service, which we'll talk about here in a moment. We also think it's important that the board itself have a mission statement. That is not the same as we as a board exist to support the mission of the organization. That's like lazy speak. The board mission statement should be more as it relates to what is the board's goal as far as what is it striving to do as far as delivering on the expectations of a board, and then some goal setting in there. Getting your board to have that conversation creates, like I said before about the statement of values, it's kind of that rallying cry. It's the thing that we're all bound to because we've all agreed that this is where we're going as an organization and as a board. Doing assessments and evaluations are also important. The mission delivery and volunteer opportunities. Interestingly enough, going back to the Bozeman Schools Foundation board, that is the first board I've been on where they use Sign Up Genius. I mean, duh. To have volunteer opportunities, to get involved, to have an actual role in those mission delivery events. Sign Up Genius is the easiest way to do that because you can put the entire calendar in, and then I get to put in, I mean, I'm committed to something in May already for that particular board, and it sends me reminders. It sends me reminders. I don't have to do it. And for goodness sakes, the executive director doesn't have to do it either. And then the board commitment form, which we'll talk about here in a second. So the 3D of board service is this. There's the doer, there's the donor, and there's the door opener. The idea here is that there's an opportunity for every single board member to be at least one of those. But hopefully you have multiple board members who are all three of those. From my perspective, when you're recruiting somebody, you should be looking for somebody who's going to be at least two of these things. So it's pretty obvious as it relates to the sort of the name, what it is that they're the roles that they're fulfilling. So I'm not going to read it. But the biggest takeaway from this is there is an opportunity for a board member to quote unquote just be a doer. That's important. But it gets even more impactful when they're also a donor, or they're also a door opener, or they're all three. We are striving for the center of that Venn diagram, obviously. That's where we have the sweet spot, and we want a large number of our our board members there. But we'll take the overlaps, right? We'll just take the double overlaps as well. The reason I like this particular setup as it relates to sort of defining what board service means is it's a lot easier for board members to kind of see where they fit within the organization. A donor doesn't necessarily, have to also be a fundraiser. That usually falls more on the door opener side. And interestingly enough, if you notice, the door opener, though, doesn't say fundraiser. The door opener says, set up meetings, make introductions. So often board members don't even want to do that because they think that they're the ones who are going to have to make the ask. They don't have to make the ask. Oftentimes the ask almost happens unto itself. But there's categories basically for each and every individual sort of level of inclination of being involved in a board. The one thing that I want to point out is this section here in the upper right corner, this know the mission, advocate for the organization, being reputation positive, participate, discuss, decide, etc. That is everybody should be doing that section. So if you can check all 5 of these boxes, then fine, just check one of these, right? Or say, I'm going to be one of these. But every single one of these should be checked by every single board member as well. So this leads us to essentially that board commitment form. I hope you're using board commitment forms. This has kind of become a rising trend, so to speak, in Bozeman. It's definitely something that's been out there, but it basically gives every single board member the opportunity to say, I am willing to do X, and Y and Z, and then back to A, B, C, D, E, etc. But there are multiple, variations of this out there. There's some that are really good from like Board Source. M&A, I think, has a couple. So there's ones that you can beg, borrow, and steal off of. I've provided what I consider to be sort of the 6 primary categories with the like other section that might be specific for your organization. But giving board members the opportunity to step forward and say, I'm willing to do X, and then measuring their progress is super important. So on a quarterly basis at most, but certainly call it, every 6 months, you're giving the board members a peek at their board commitment form, and they get to self-assess whether they're meeting that mark. It is definitely a document that will light a fire under board members, good board members, let's put it that way. Board members who've said, I'm gonna give or get a combination of 50 grand for your organization. So maybe that means I cut a check for 5 grand, and then I found sponsorships for organizations or helped you raise or get auction items or whatever it might be. But when I say I'm going to do something, that is a much different position to be in than being told I'm going to do something. So these board commitment forms, inclusive of a signature, by the way, inclusive of a signature, that also get turned in. So they're not just sitting on it and it's like the super secret type of thing. This is one of the biggest motivations to be engaged in an organization, especially when you include some of that direct program support piece, where I'm also going to come to whatever. I'm going to come to 50% of the events. I'm also going to invite somebody. So that plus up attendance, that's a section that sometimes you don't see on some of those forms that are out there in the ether. But saying that not only I'm going to come to events, but I'm also going to bring or invite other people to events, that's big, because you want your board to obviously be, I shouldn't say obvious, in my mind it's obvious, but you want your board to be increasing your network, and they do that by obviously bringing people. And honestly, one of the best things about the board commitment form, aside from having somebody actually commit into it, is it gives every single board member a broader view of ways to impact the organization. That it's not just showing up and participating in meetings, that it's not just writing a check for $1,000 at the end of the year, that it's not just coming to the gala. There's a bunch of different ways that you can help the organization, and then they get to say, well, these are the ones that I'm interested in doing it. The last thing I'd say is this, and that is that from an engagement standpoint, the piece that I see organizations forgetting about the most is the simplest one. And it's this one. It's the Oprah Winfrey, right? It's the you get a thank you, you get a thank you, everybody gets a thank you. Because in the end, what we want to do is make sure that individuals get and understand that they are difference makers. Being a difference maker is a lot different than saying you have an impact. As an aside, I once wrote a speech for somebody that sounded like super positive, but in reality, they were giving a speech about something that they didn't really like. And so we did say things like, your impact is immeasurable. Well, that could be like super positive, but in reality, it can also be super negative. So when you say you're an impact maker, or, you have an impact, I don't like that, because you feel like you have to put the word positive in front of it. Somehow or another, difference maker feels better. And sure, you could also say difference maker is, wow, you really screwed that up and that created a difference. But somehow or another, that phrase of appreciating the difference maker has a better connotation to it. Board members need to get and understand that while they're doing this 30,000-foot work, they are making a difference for your organization. So give them public recognition. Again, Bozeman Schools Foundation, they are spotlighting their board members on their Facebook page. And do event recognition. So you're at your gala and you're recognizing the work of your board members. The newspaper, it sounds crazy because now it's being delivered via mail. I still get it, mind you, because I love it. But it's online as well. And there's those in business or in the news or whatever it is, the business section, you can announce your board members in that. I don't even know if that costs anything. There are ads that some organizations take out thanking their board members as well. I also think it's important to do intra-board recognition, meaning at board meetings or in board communications, call out Thank you so much to Jill for her exceptional work on blah, blah, blah. I really appreciated, her volunteering her time to do blah, blah, blah. Nominations, there's plenty of sort of service nominations that are out there in the community that we can be nominating our board members for. Don't overlook the importance of handwritten cards. And I don't mean just from the executive director. Maybe a handwritten card from a scholarship recipient. Maybe a handwritten card from the employee that ran the event that the board allocated extra funds for to make it super special. Those type of handwritten cards go a long, long way. Giving them a role, I said this before in those mission delivery events, it's not just showing up, it's actually doing something. I keep using Bozeman Schools Foundation, but it's just in my brain. One of the best things that they do is hand out the books. I can't remember what the name of it right now. I should. Sorry, Jen, if you're on the call, I can't remember the name. But the board members actually deliver the books to the elementary schools kids. I mean, come on. How much more of a difference maker can you feel when you're handing this book that this kid is like jumping up and down for? So you have those variations in your organization, connect those. I also like to boards to support social connections. And what I mean by that is allowing the board to be social together. So it's not just show up, discuss, decide, leave. There's social connections on both ends of it, and find opportunities to include plus ones. So maybe at the end of one board meeting, you have, a cocktail hour or, just light hors d'oeuvres, or somebody hosts. You include plus ones in that because you want your board to connect with one another outside of the boardroom, because that's what's going to make inside of the boardroom even better. The last three things on this are just this: take the time, seeking input, advice, follow through, and just saying thank you. What the take the time phrase means is actually take the time to get to know the board member, meaning, what do they like? Do they have kids? Do they have pets? What do they like to do? And check in with them periodically. If you happen to know when their birthday is, you should know when their birthday is, right? Send out a happy birthday. Taking the time, which isn't a ton of time, is important to do. I mean, you can put every single board member's birthday into your calendar as a reminder, and you look like a superstar, right? When you send the email. And in reality, it's just Google Calendar telling you to send an email. Great. But taking the time means a lot. The seeking input, advice, and the last piece is the follow through. The follow through is quite frankly the most important. If you're going to involve somebody in questions or conversations or seeking their advice, you better act on it. That doesn't mean you take it, but you act on it and you tell them, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is what I decided to do. And then, like I said before, the thank you just can't go far enough. Because in the end, what you're trying to get to is that point where your board members all know and behave like VIPs, meaning they get and understand that they are very important people, not in the ha ha sort of way, but like they get and have reverence for the role, because they are and need to understand that their purpose is also very important, that they then also have reverence for the process that they go through, that they participate in that process, because they get and understand that they are delivering that impact component. I should have capitalized the P in impact to make it also a P. But nevertheless, the point being that, when we treat our board members through, or when we treat our board members to a very intentional onboarding process that's much broader, much bigger than just one orientation session, you are going to engage board members at a new and different level that's just going to beget better board members. And as I said at the start, better board members beget better board members, which means you have a stronger, more engaged, and more effective board in the long run. I'm 4 minutes over time, Jill. Did I do okay? So that's the material. And I'm happy to answer questions. Now I'm also happy to answer questions offline. But you'll see here that there's the contact information, but we can also send the slides after this. But yeah, so that's it. A lot of information thrown at you. I made it under the 90-minute mark, so you don't have info much-mation at this point in time.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Everyone, if we could just give Melanie a big thank you through the chat, through emojis, through big waves and claps and snaps, we would appreciate it. Thank you for volunteering your time. What a wealth of knowledge. I know that gave me a lot to think about, and I hope it gave you some good tidbits to take back to your organization. As Melanie said, we'll be sending out the slides and the recording, as well as a survey. If you could take a minute to fill it out, that helps us continue to improve our programs. I also want to give a big thank you. I forgot at the beginning to thank First Security Bank, our sponsor, who keeps this program free for all of us so that we can all learn together. And then my only announcement for the day is just a reminder that Nonprofit Cafe is usually the fourth Friday of the month, but because of the holidays for November and December, it's the second Friday of the month. So 2 weeks from today is our next Nonprofit Cafe session. Both November and December are going to be focused on fundraising. In November, Kevin Sylvester of Eagle Mount is going to be leading a session on year-end fundraising. And then in December, Hannah Cortez of the Dotted Eye is going to be leading a session on how to plan for a successful 2024 for grant writing. So we're going to do a whole kind of year game plan for grant writing. All of that being said, Melanie, that was amazing. Thank you. We are grateful to each and every one of you for joining this morning and taking the time to learn with us. If there's anything we can do to continue to support your organizations and your missions, please don't be shy. But I hope you all stay warm and have a lovely, lovely Friday.